The storm arrived without warning, as if the universe itself had chosen this moment to rend its own fabric. Kratos, the ghost of Sparta, had faced tempests that shattered mountains, lightning that split the sky, and winds that howled with the fury of forgotten gods, but this was unlike anything he had ever endured. The air around him thickened, turning viscous and red, and the sky cracked with veins of crimson light. The earth beneath his feet buckled and fractured, fissures glowing with an unholy fire. Every instinct in him screamed to fight, to charge into the heart of it, yet no path, no direction, offered itself. The storm was not a storm of wind or rain. It was a storm of reality itself, tearing at the edges of the world, unmaking it piece by piece. A scream echoed somewhere inside the vortex, or perhaps it came from within him. His vision blurred as the world became a twisting, writhing labyrinth of fire and shadow. And then, without a moment to brace, he fell. The sensation was not falling in the simple sense he knew. There was no gravity, no resistance, no up or down, but an endless plunge through a liquid of blood and light. A crimson tide that pressed against his skin like a living thing. As he descended, visions assaulted him, not gently, but like sharpened knives, the rage he had carried against gods and mortals alike, the betrayals that had seared his soul, the weight of every life he had taken, and every moment he had failed to save. Yet, strangely, they did not break him. Instead, the images, fierce and relentless, settled into a rhythm he recognized. He had lived through worse. A lifetime of grief, of vengeance, of burning hatred. This was nothing new. Each memory, each face twisted in anger or pain, passed over him like waves against a stone, leaving him untouched. Where most men might crumble under the sheer magnitude of self-reflection, Kratos felt a calm settle over him, as if the storm itself recognized him and yielded, just for a moment, before dragging him further into its heart. The vortex spat him into darkness, and for an instant there was nothing. No sky, no land, no horizon. Only the faint echo of something immense and hungry. Then light returned, but it was not the light of sun or fire. It was the cold, dead light of a galaxy ruled by something utterly alien to him. Stars gleamed like teeth behind clouds of ash and ruin. Worlds, entire planets, floated like corpses in a sea of shadow, their surfaces carved with monuments of despair, monuments not to heroes or kings, but to unending suffering. The Warp had delivered him here, not to a battlefield, not to Olympus reborn, but to a universe where gods devoured souls instead of guiding them. He moved through it slowly, each step impossible yet inevitable, as if the very ground or lack thereof obeyed him reluctantly. The sheer scale of the realm defied comprehension. Where his world had been the domain of Olympus, flawed but familiar, this galaxy was ruled by a pantheon of death. The Imperium, they would later call it, though the names mattered little here. Its people had been ground beneath the wheels of endless dogma, their faith twisted into obsession, their lives meaningless against the machinery of the divine hunger that oversaw them. It was a perfection of suffering, an order without mercy, a religion without light dot. In the quiet of this vast emptiness, Kratos felt the subtle contrast between his past and this present. In Greece, gods had been flawed, yes, cruel even, but they were tangible, fallible. They could be bargained with, struck down, feared, and occasionally revered. Here, gods were not distant figures, they were devourers, ever-present and insatiable. The universe itself seemed to bow to their hunger, and mortals, if they could even be called that, moved like insects, their struggles insignificant. The comparison struck him, not with surprise, but with a deep, measured understanding. The Olympians had been tyrants, but they were mere mortals in godly skin. These entities were monsters who had learned to wield belief as a weapon. A chill passed over him, not from cold, but from comprehension. The Warp was alive, and it was hungry for more than flesh. It hungered for the soul itself, and Kratos, carrying all the weight of his own, was now within its reach. Shadows stretched and bent around him, and the faint outlines of figures' shapes, formed from pain and memory, swirled in the distance. They whispered in languages he did not understand, yet somehow felt intimately familiar. They were echoes of hatred, of fear, of hope corrupted. And as he looked upon them, he realized that the storm which had brought him here had not been random. It was a calling, a reckoning. The Warp had chosen him, and he had no choice but to answer. Yet Kratos did not tremble. Instead, a quiet determination settled into his shoulders, grounding him. He had fought gods, titans, and monsters of unimaginable scale, and he had survived. Each world he had walked had tried to break him, and each time he had endured. The visions of his past, the suffering of countless innocents, the betrayals and vengeance, they were not chains here, but tools. Every scar, every loss, every whispered curse shaped him into a weapon capable of walking through this new, terrible galaxy without succumbing. He was, in a sense, prepared. Perhaps not for the creatures that dwelled here, nor for the mechanisms of belief that enslaved entire systems, but for the principle of survival itself. The comparison returned, unbidden, yet undeniable. In Greece, men and gods alike had suffered, but suffering was a lesson, a narrative with an end. Here, suffering was eternal, baked into the cosmos itself. Worlds fell not because of chance or war, but because the universe was designed to consume them. The galaxy was a tomb of perfection, its perfection defined not by beauty, but by unyielding cruelty. Kratos felt a dark, awe-not fear, exactly, but a recognition of the scale, a respect for the scope of the horror, tempered by the knowledge that he had faced horror before and lived, somewhere in the distance. A world twisted in agony, its skies boiling, oceans gone. The land cracked into geometric patterns that hinted at a will behind the suffering. Cities sprawled with impossible architecture, towering spires of bone and stone, each structure whispering stories of lives utterly consumed. The very air seemed thick with entropy, a pressure that threatened sanity. And yet, amidst it all, Kratos moved. Not with urgency, not with panic, but with measured steps, as if the calm he had carried through his fall had anchored him against the chaos. The galaxy had swallowed him, yet he was not lost. Here, at the threshold of infinite despair, the contrast was clear. Olympus had taught him fear, vengeance, and mortality. This galaxy offered him something else, entirely proof that the cosmos could be infinitely cruel, endlessly devouring, and yet entirely indifferent. And as Kratos stepped forward, guided by instinct, rage, and the faint echo of the past he carried, the first thread of curiosity began to unfurl. Why here? Why now? And what, if anything, wanted him? The storm had ended, but the question remained. The Warp had chosen, and Kratos had survived that in that suspended moment. Standing between what had been and what had become, Kratos understood the truth of his new reality. Gods could be fought, even if they were immortal. But this galaxy, this empire of despair, demanded something different. Understanding, patience, endurance, and a willingness to confront not just flesh, but the very essence of belief twisted into weaponry. And in that realization, he felt a quiet, measured calm, the kind that comes only to those who have seen death in its many forms and walked on. The Warp had called. He had answered. And the story of what would follow had only just begun. Kratos fell from the sky like a wrathful comet, carving through clouds thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burning incense. Below him, the world was a cathedral of chaos and devotion alike, a shrine planet besieged, its spires scorched and towers shattered, the land soaked with ash and blood. The heretics had pressed close, chanting in tongues older than humanity, their symbols twisting in the light like living things. He struck the surface with the force of a god unbound, a crater forming beneath him, shockwaves radiating outward and flattening both cultists and terrain alike. The battlefield, a sprawling tableau of desperate struggle, was instantly erased, leaving only shattered stone, smoldering earth, and the echo of what had been docked from the rim of the impact. The Adeptus Sororitas and Imperial Guardsmen emerged, their armor battered, their weapons trembling in awe and terror. They had fought heretics before, known the marks of demons, and yet nothing in all their experience had prepared them for this. A man, if he could be called, that stood at the center of the crater, bare-chested, muscles corded like sculpted marble, eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the smoke and flame. His presence alone radiated power, so absolute that the battlefield itself seemed to recoil. The sisters crossed themselves. whispering prayers that had never felt so small or inadequate, their voices shaking. "By the Emperor! What manner of demon is this?" The guardsmen lowered their lasguns, unsure whether to fire or kneel. Some muttered under their breath, naming him in reverence they barely understood. A forgotten Primarch returned from myth to lead them against impossible odds. But Kratos acknowledged none of them. He did not fight for the Imperium, nor for the Emperor, nor for the broken faith of men. He fought because the path ahead demanded nothing less. The Chaos Cultists, sensing his presence, surged forward like insects against a flame. They wielded blades, axes, and fire, their rituals a maddened cacophony, their bodies scarred by mutation and devotion alike. Kratos moved with an effortless fluidity, a force of pure instinct honed by decades of war and suffering. His strikes were not calculated, only inevitable. Limbs severed, heads cleaved, bodies shattered under blows that would have leveled a building. Blood and ichor painted him like armor, but he did not pause, did not hesitate. The cultists fell like wheat before a scythe, their cries of rage and terror swallowed by the silent rhythm of his approach. The Sisters of Battle had never seen anything like it. Some clutched their bolters tightly, some fell to their knees, trembling. They were warriors trained to face demons and sorcery, yet the sheer scale and decisiveness of his violence suggested something beyond even the Warp's imaginings. One of them dared to speak, voice quivering. He is not of this realm. The Emperor preserve us. It is a demon." The Imperial guardsmen were equally confounded. Many had lived long enough to see Primarchs in legend, and while no Primarch had ever walked among them in flesh, they could not deny the aura of command and terror radiating from the giant. "By the Emperor? Could it be?" whispered one, gripping his lascan as if mere hope could anchor him against disbelief. Their training faltered under the weight of awe, and yet some could not restrain themselves. They raised their weapons. Uncertain whether to fire or bow, Kratos did not answer their prayers, their doubts, or their fear. He moved across the battlefield as one would traverse a garden, but his garden was littered with the broken forms of men and monsters alike. Each step was measured, deliberate, yet carried the weight of inevitability. Cultists and minor demons alike fell before him, not in resistance, but in recognition that their fight was meaningless. He had no allegiance, no ideology beyond survival, and the silent pull of his own instinct. And yet, the Imperium could not abide neutrality. From the distance, a kill team dispatched by the Inquisition arrived, their armor sleek and black, inscribed with purity seals and iconography denoting zeal and duty. They did not approach with hesitation. They had orders. Kill the unknown. They moved as one, tactical and precise, their weapons honed for efficiency, their minds trained to override fear. They believed they were facing a threat that might rival a demon or even a Primarch in power. In truth, they were about to learn that some forces defy categorization. The kill team opened fire. Lasbolts tore through the air, scorching earth and stone, splintering masonry, and carving streaks of red against the smoke-filled sky. Kratos paused mid-step, noting the discharge with the quiet appraisal of a predator regarding small, agitated creatures. Lost fire struck him, but passed harmlessly against flesh that had weathered mountains and swords alike. When he moved, it was only a shift of weight. A turn of the torso, and the first wave of attackers fell before him without the chance to comprehend the force that struck. The Sisters of Battle reacted instinctively, firing upon him in panic, yet hesitation clung to their fingers. Their bolters erupted, thunderous and precise, but their ammunition was trivial. Kratos, in response, did not even raise a weapon. He simply strode forward, a tidal wave of inevitability. A single sweep of his arm sent bolter rounds scattering and bodies flying as if caught in a gust of wind. To him, this was not war. It was a demonstration of path and instinct. A natural response to obstruction, nothing more. Chaos cultists still alive tried to rally, forming a weak line, chanting in desperation, attempting to call upon the Warp itself to aid them. But the energy that twisted through their spells faltered against him, dissipating as if his presence repelled the very Warp that birthed their power. Each strike he made was decisive, absolute, and unflinching. No hesitation, no remorse, no spectacle, just action. And action in his hands was destruction. unrelenting and cleaned out from the vantage point of the battlefield. It became clear that the Imperium had misread the situation entirely. The sisters whispered in fear and awe. The guardsmen muttered uncertain praises. The Inquisition's kill team realized too late that they faced not a demon, not a renegade, but something inhumanly primordial. The myths of the Imperium, stories of Primarchs and saints, were meaningless here. Kratos operated on a level of reality that made fear and reverence indistinguishable. Yet, despite the carnage and chaos, Kratos walked. He did not pursue the Imperium soldiers, nor did he seek to dismantle their fortifications. He did not take sides. He did not demand worship. He did not acknowledge oaths or commandments. His path was singular, determined by nothing more than the motion forward. And for a time, it seemed as though he might leave the Imperium untouched. A figure of power glimpsed, but not fully understood, until they fired again. A single, poorly judged lasbolt struck near him, not threatening, not even painful, but enough to draw his attention. The subtle defiance, the assumption that their authority or numbers mattered, kindled something primal in him. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing, and the air seemed to grow heavy with expectation. The battlefield, already scarred by chaos and fire, waited, suspended in the tension of that moment. It was not wrath exactly, but recognition. Defiance could not go unanswered. And those who would challenge him, even out of fear or duty, would soon learn that the universe did not bend to expectation. Kratos advanced. Step by step, his presence alone bending the space around him, demanding attention, respect, fear. The Imperium, trained to recognize the scales of power and the hierarchies of war, struggled to categorize him. Was he a demon? A forgotten Primarch? A force of the warp itself? None of it mattered. The truth was simpler, more terrifying in its clarity. Kratos moved according to his own rules, and the galaxy, vast and unyielding, had no claim over him. Not as the kill team readied their next salvo and the sisters faltered in prayer. A single silent thought passed through the mind of every witness. This was no servant of the Emperor. This was no weapon to be deployed, no tool of divine justice. This was a force that existed entirely outside their comprehension, one that answered only to itself. And in that realization, the fear deepened, the awe strengthened, and the war-torn shrine planet held its breath, knowing that the world's first true encounter with the god of war had only just begun. Kratos did not struggle when the null chains coiled around him, nor when the psychic dampers snapped into place. Their exotic metals hummed faintly, absorbing and neutralizing whatever power lingered in his aura. To the Inquisition, these were the tools that could contain the uncontainable, that could bind the impossible, that could force the universe's anomalies to speak. And yet, as he was lifted from the wreckage of the shrine planet and brought into the void-lit interrogation chamber, there was a stillness about him that unsettled even the most seasoned agents. He was calm, unyielding, untouched by fear. The chamber itself seemed designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Dark alloys gleamed under the sterile light, conduits hummed with restrained energy, and walls lined with runes of containment pulsed faintly with psychic wards. In the center of it all, Kratos sat restrained, not by chains, not by force, but by expectation, as if the galaxy itself had attempted to negotiate his cooperation through intimidation. The Inquisitor, tall and austere, approached, his cloak whispering against the floor. A man or something like one, he wore the sigils of the Ordo Malleus and the purity seals of a lifetime's devotion. His eyes, sharp and calculating, measured Kratos not as a man, not as a warrior, but as a subject. You are anomalous, the Inquisitor said, voice like tempered iron. Your presence defies classification. Psychic signatures suggest a demigod of unusual origin, yet the warp resonates strangely against you. You are not fully aligned with the immaterium. You are unknown. Kratos said nothing. His gaze, unflinching, held the weight of countless battles, of titans felled, of gods slain. There was no fear, no desire, no allegiance. Only the quiet patience of one who had long since learned that the universe bends for no one. The Inquisitor extended a hand, fingers weaving intricate motions in the air. A psychic probe reached for Kratos' mind, an attempt to pierce and map the contours of his consciousness. Images of war, of rage, of hatred, and of power swirled like liquid, meant to be contained, classified, and understood. And yet, the probe recoiled violently, as if his mind were a blade, cutting through the instruments designed to touch it. Sparks ran along the dampeners. The chains hummed with unnatural resonance. The Inquisitor staggered back, heart pounding, mind reeling. Nothing like this has been catalogued, he thought. Nothing in the Emperor's archives describes it. I have killed gods, Kratos said finally, his voice quiet but unyielding, carrying the cadence of command. Titans, monsters, mortals who thought themselves gods. I have walked through death, through the blood of armies, and through the fire of Olympus itself. I answer to nothing but the path I choose. The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed. And yet you exist here. You move through the Imperium, as though your presence alone does not ignite terror. Mutant? Warp entity? Lost demigod? His voice grew sharp, brittle with the pressure of certainty strained against reality. We have no category for you. You are a variable we cannot control. Kratos did not correct him. He did not care for names, labels, or classifications. They were meaningless. The universe had called him here, and he had come, and that was enough. A sudden flare erupted from the Emperor's tarot, positioned nearby on a pedestal of sacred obsidian. The cards, normally inert, glowed violently, twisting in the light. Symbols that had been etched and consecrated for centuries shimmered and rotated, forming patterns that defied comprehension. The Inquisitor froze as a whisper echoed through the chamber, soft yet resonant, seeming to vibrate in the very marrow of his bones. The Godslayer enters the long war. Kratos' eyes flickered toward the cards. He did not speak, did not move, but a quiet recognition passed through him, almost imperceptible. He had long walked paths foretold, walked trails of prophecy and vengeance alike. Yet even prophecy had never demanded more than he could endure. And here, in the still air of a chamber designed to restrain the impossible, he understood that the galaxy had cast him as a figure in its story. Whether he wished it or not, the Inquisitor's hands moved again. Faster now, weaving sigils and wards in a desperate attempt to map, to read, to control. Kratos leaned slightly, testing the bonds, feeling the dampening energies, weighing their strength. The chains hummed, resonated, strained, but his patience was infinite. A single flex of his wrist sent vibrations along the null metal, tiny sparks jumping from restraint to restraint. The Inquisitor noticed the change, fear clawing at his composure. Then, as if the air itself parted at his will, Kratos moved. Not violently, not chaotically, but with deliberate, effortless power. The chains snapped under his strength, as though time and effort had no purchase against him. Dampeners fizzled and popped. Wards melted like candle wax under his presence, and the Inquisitor staggered, barely maintaining his footing. This was not mere strength, it was inevitability, a force of nature ungoverned by expectation or law. Kratos rose from the floor, the room trembling beneath the weight of his presence. He had said nothing more than necessary, yet every syllable of his silence carried more authority than all the prayers, oaths, and spells of the chamber combined. He was not a prisoner. He was not a subject. He was a constant, a variable the Imperium could not understand, a force that existed independent of their classifications and hierarchies. The Inquisitor recovered his composure, though it was tenuous. You defy all precedent, he said. The Emperor's tarot prophecy. Everything indicates your arrival has significance. Yet significance is meaningless if it cannot be controlled. He clenched his fists, white knuckles pressing against centuries of training and dogma. Who are you? Kratos' voice was calm, almost tired, as if centuries of conflict had dulled the need for explanation. I am what must be. I have walked through gods and monsters alike. I answer to nothing but the path ahead. Classification does not concern me, nor prophecy, nor empire. I move because I must, and none may stop me. For a moment, the chamber was silent, save for the hum of residual energy and the faint whisper of the prophecy repeating in the minds of those present. The Inquisitor understood, with sudden clarity, that none of their tools, none of their faith, none of their study could constrain this being. He was beyond comprehension, beyond fear, beyond hope. And then Kratos acted, The chains shattered completely, metal and energy alike scattering into sparks and shards. The dampeners, rendered inert, fell to the floor with dull, hollow clanks. Wards and sigils twisted and bent under the sheer, unspoken authority of his presence. He stepped forward, and the room seemed to shrink. The Inquisitor felt the pressure of inevitability pressing down upon him. In that single moment, the Godslayer had declared the futility of control, the impossibility of containment, and the utter irrelevance of fear when faced with inevitability incarnate. Kratos paused in the center of the chamber, scanning the void-lit walls, the Inquisitor, the tarot glowing like a warning. His calm presence, his silent power, radiated certainty. He was not here to fight, to worship, or to destroy. Not yet, but he was here. And that was enough to remind the Imperium that some forces could not be catalogued, could not be bound, and could not be predicted. The prophecy whispered once more, softer now, as though acknowledging the truth of his being. The Godslayer enters the long war. The Inquisitor knelt slightly, not in worship, but in recognition. The galaxy had summoned a force it could neither tame nor fully comprehend. And Kratos, indifferent to titles, oaths, and dogma, had answered. The warp stirred. At first, it was subtle, a ripple beneath the fabric of reality, a quiver in the currents of the Imperium that went unnoticed by most mortals, even by the keenest psychers. But Kratos sensed it, not through fear, nor through training, but through instinct. Something vast and alien had turned its gaze upon him, and for the first time, he realized that the storm which had brought him here was not random. The universe itself, or something far greater, had marked him. From the infinite chaos of the warp, four presences emerged, coalescing in forms perceptible only in glimpses, shapes, colors, emotions impossible to reconcile. Khorne, the blood god, roared without sound, his attention drawn to the raw, unbridled fury that clung to Kratos like a second skin. Rage that had toppled titans, slain gods, and shattered empires. It was a current of energy Khorne could not ignore. The god of war and blood longed to claim him as a champion, to bend him into a weapon for endless slaughter. Yet Kratos did not yield, did not fight or submit, but simply stood, unflinching, acknowledging the existence of this hunger with quiet contempt. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, twisted and shimmered around the edges of perception, analyzing the infinite potentialities radiating from Kratos. Each choice he had ever made, every strike, every act of vengeance, every path avoided, branched into innumerable futures. Tzeentch saw possibilities that defied logic and time itself, a kaleidoscope of outcomes swirling and colliding. And yet, the Godslayer moved in a manner that collapsed all timelines into a singular clarity. He was not chaotic. He was not a tool. He was a force that refused to be manipulated, and for that, the architect of change regarded him with fascinated consternation. Slaanesh, the prince of excess, lingered like a whisper in the edges of thought, eyes and tendrils of perception drawn to the depth of pain and discipline that radiated from the Godslayer. She felt the echoes of suffering that had shaped him, the intensity of restraint interlaced with brutality, the precise measurement of strength and will. She lusted not for his body, nor his soul, but for the exquisite perfection of his endurance, the way he had suffered, and yet never succumbed to corruption, indulgence, or despair. It was a beauty that teased and tormented, and she reached toward it with all-consuming desire. Yet Kratos' gaze, calm and unwavering, rebuffed her as easily as one might brush aside a fly. Nurgle, the Plague Father, regarded him differently. Where the others hungered, schemed, or lusted, Nurgle saw what could be welcomed, nurtured, and ultimately protected in decay. He smelled grief, fatigue, and the subtle injuries to spirit that came from a lifetime of ceaseless combat. He longed to enfold Kratos, as one would a wounded, grieving child, to grant succor even as he imposed inevitable disease, to offer communion in shared suffering. But Kratos, hardened and unbending, did not seek comfort. He acknowledged Nurgle's presence without a word, without gesture, rejecting the invitation with a simplicity that could not be twisted or softened. The warp attempted subtle seductions. Visions rose around him, the spilling of blood in unimaginable quantities at Khorne's urging. Secret futures that Tzeentch promised in exchange for loyalty. intoxicating visions of surrender and indulgence whispered by Slaanesh, and the quiet, suffocating embrace of Nurgle's compassion. Each vision flickered like a flame at the edge of perception, meant to ensnare, to bend, to test. But Kratos observed them as one observes insects crawling on stone, an indifferent, unyielding eye that understood the nature of temptation and dismissed it entirely. Khorne, however, did not tolerate such defiance. Rage, pure and unfettered, boiled within him. The god of blood had demanded attention, sought to claim a warrior worthy of the endless fields of combat, and found his offering untouched, unbroken, unbowed. The personal affront ignited an ancient, incomprehensible wrath. Khorne would not wait, would not coax, would not negotiate. He unleashed a host of demons, titanic creatures of muscle, claw, and teeth, infused with the essence of slaughter, intent on forcing Kratos into a war he had not asked for. The sky of the mortal realm shivered as the first tendrils of their emergence ripped through reality, clawing from the warp like living shadows hungry for blood. Kratos watched their arrival without haste. Each demon, grotesque in form and driven by the singular hunger of Khorne's will, surged forward as though the world itself were a battlefield awaiting his judgment. The soldiers of the Imperium, already scattered and terrified, sensed the approach of these horrors. And yet, Kratos did not rush to meet them. He did not even move quickly. Instead, he stepped forward with deliberate certainty, as though the act of his presence alone shaped the battlefield. The demons faltered in his gaze, a recognition of inevitability flashing in their otherworldly eyes. In that moment, a revelation struck him, sharp and undeniable. The warp itself wanted him. It did not simply test him. It did not merely observe. Every current, every ripple, every subtle vibration in the Imperium hinted at an attention he had never known. He was no longer merely a warrior fallen into a foreign galaxy. He was an anomaly, a singularity around which entire currents of cosmic force now shifted and converged. The Chaos Gods did not simply desire him. They were aware, reacting, probing, seeking to shape a fate that he alone might reject. The contrast between his past and present became stark. In Greece, he had walked among flawed Olympians, gods whose petty squabbles shaped the lives of mortals, but whose ambitions were limited by ego and mortality. Here, he faced entities who were as vast as worlds, embodiments of elemental emotion and corruption, who could bend the very fabric of existence. And yet, he remained undaunted, grounded by the discipline honed over centuries of war, grief, and vengeance. The Olympians had been arrogant and dangerous. The Chaos Gods were omnipotent and malignant. The difference mattered little. To Kratos, all gods, all monsters, all powers were challenges to be met with clarity, strength, and instinct. He flexed his hands and felt the raw pulse of energy in the air around him. The demons, summoned with the fury of Khorne's wrath, pressed forward, a wave of muscle, horn, and claw. Their forms flickered and shimmered, as though reality itself strained to contain their shape. And still, Kratos did not fear. He had faced titans larger than mountains, gods more vengeful than entire armies. This, he understood, was another test. Another path through violence that would either open the way forward or prove a measure of his strength. Visions of temptation continued to flash at the edge of his perception. Insidious and persistent, yet he met them with calm contempt. Rage, cunning, seduction, despair, none could sway him. He did not bargain, he did not negotiate, he did not even hesitate. The gods of this galaxy were accustomed to worship, to submission, to fear. They had never encountered one like him. Khorne, growing frustrated, bellowed through the warp, sending waves of psychic pressure and carnage that rattled the mortal realm. Yet even in that personal fury, Kratos felt no fear. He recognized the pattern, the rhythm, the essence of the challenge. The warp did not simply oppose him, it interacted with him. It sought him, tested him, tempted him. And he would answer, not with words, not with subservience, but with the certainty of his own path, the inevitability of his will. In that moment, amidst the flickering demons, the whispering temptations, and the palpable presence of godlike entities, Kratos understood a truth few mortals would ever glimpse: the galaxy itself, in all its complexity, chaos, and ambition, had taken notice. And notice, he realized, was the first step toward confrontation. The long war, however, was not yet his concern. There would be time for prophecy, for enemies, for battles that spanned worlds and decades. For now, he simply walked, calm, resolute, aware that even as the forces of the warp gathered, their intentions mattered little. He answered to nothing. He obeyed no command. He existed, and in existing, he had already begun to reshape the currents of destiny themselves. The Forge world lay in ruin, its once gleaming factories and foundries now scorched, shattered, and littered with molten metal and shattered stone. Smoke rose in thick, choking plumes, curling around twisted spires and war-torn streets. Khorne's legions had descended in waves, thousands of demons, their forms blasphemous and nightmarish, a living tide of muscle, horn, and blood, moving with singular purpose. They surged across the landscape like a river of fire, a force of destruction unbridled by logic or mercy. And yet, in the center of the chaos, there stood one figure, still, calm, and monumental. Kratos surveyed them with an unblinking gaze. His bare chest dusted with ash and blood from previous battles, his axes resting easily in his hands. He did not roar, did not bellow, did not charge with fury. His calm was deliberate, unsettling an unnatural serenity that radiated outward, disturbing the demons who had never before encountered a predator that faced them without anger, without fear. Their screeches rose in a discordant chorus, confused and unnerved by his lack of reaction. They had expected rage, submission, worship, or terror. None of these manifested. Only inevitability. The first wave struck. Bloodletters, agile and savage, leaped and tore with claws and hellblades, their ritualistic blood rites fueling a frenzy meant to overwhelm. Kratos did not flinch. He stepped forward, a single motion, and swept one axe in a wide arc. Time seemed to bend around the strike, the impact audible in the hush of disbelief. Limbs severed mid-leap, bodies disintegrated under the perfect precision of his blow, and the river of demons faltered. He moved slowly, deliberately, each swing measured, each strike final. Blood spilled like rain, but he moved with the rhythm of inevitability. Not rage, as though the act itself was enough. Unhurried and absolute. Juggernauts followed. Towering horrors, armored in bone and brass. Their sheer bulk meant to crush all resistance. Kratos met them with patience. Each step he took was deliberate, unhurried, as if measuring the weight of their intent. When the first juggernaut lunged, he sidestepped, caught the creature's massive arm, and with a twist and heave, shattered its shoulder and sent it crashing into the ground. Sparks and flames erupted from its armored plating as it fell, groaning in a manner that suggested surprise, confusion, and fear. The calmness of the God-Slayer, his serenity in the face of carnage, unnerved the demons more than his brutality. They had never fought a killer who did not rage, who did not thirst, who did not seek glory or blood for pleasure. A demon prince, colossal and radiant with the unholy fire of Khorne, emerged from the center of the battlefield. Its eyes burned like twin suns, horns curling like twisted crowns, wings unfurling in a display of raw power. It roared, a sound that reverberated through the Forge world, shaking the foundations of collapsed factories and blasted streets. Kratos advanced, unhurried, letting the creature's fury wash over him like wind over stone. The prince struck first, claws raking, a blast of warp fire erupting from its maw, intended to melt flesh and steel alike. Kratos moved with deliberate grace, dodging, countering, pivoting, and striking with poetic precision. The duel unfolded in slow motion, each clash of axe against claw a statement of inevitability. Sparks leapt, armor and flesh tore, and yet Kratos remained calm, the eye of a storm untouched by the maelstrom around him. The demon prince howled in frustration, its rage intensifying, yet he met every attack with the patience of a predator, the awareness of a god accustomed to the inevitability of death. With a single fluid motion, he drove an axe through its chest, spun it in a half circle, and tore the creature apart from the inside out. Time seemed to stretch as tendrils of warp energy dissipated into nothing, leaving only silence and a crater scorched into the ground. From afar, the Imperium watched. Sister superiors and tech priests had climbed high towers, using augurs, optics, and psychic attunements to observe the battle. They had anticipated carnage, yes, but not this. The destruction was surgical, deliberate, almost artistic in its execution. One tech priest, his mechadendrites twitching as he analyzed the combat, whispered in awe and fear, "He is either a proto-Primarch or a fragment of some pantheon we have long forgotten. Nothing in the archives can account for this magnitude of power." Guardsmen, some trembling, some wide-eyed, watched as he cut down wave after wave of demons. To them, he was a myth made flesh, a force outside history and legend. Some murmured prayers, others shook in disbelief, but all felt the undeniable truth. Kratos was not merely strong. He was inevitable. Every strike was final. Every movement a measure of destiny made manifest. Yet, even in the face of total victory, Kratos did not linger. He did not revel in the slaughter, did not glance at the corpses of the demons, did not raise his voice in triumph. He moved forward with a singular purpose, searching. His eyes, calm and distant, scanned the horizon as if seeking something the battlefield could not provide. The demons' defeat, though catastrophic, was incidental. They were obstacles, not goals. Their numbers, terrifying though they were, meant nothing in the path he had chosen. The warp behind him pulsed faintly, a subtle reminder that he had not fought alone, that his actions resonated with cosmic consequence. Khorne's fury lingered, raw and untamed, as the blood god realized that his champion would not be claimed. Tzeentch's swirling potentialities continued to unfold, observing how Kratos defied every manipulation of chance and strategy. Slaanish's whispers receded, frustrated by the Godslayer's inability to indulge in temptation or despair. Nurgle sighed quietly, his embrace unfulfilled. Kratos had made clear, he belonged to no one, to no power, and to no god. The battlefield quieted, save for the faint hiss of molten metal and the echoes of destruction. Craters and ruined buildings bore witness to the scale of his actions, but he did not look back. Imperium observers noted the path of devastation, the sheer scale of carnage mitigated only by the precision and calm of its execution. They recorded it, studied it, debated it, and still could not fully comprehend it. He had moved through 1,000 horrors and emerged unbroken, uninterested, detached. Kratos walked. Step by step, he moved away from the ruined Forge World, leaving the demons' remnants scattered across the scarred land, leaving the Imperium to digest what they had seen. The universe had labeled him a god, a weapon, a potential threat, and yet he did not seek affirmation, did not crave recognition, did not acknowledge the hierarchy of the cosmos. He moved forward in silence, driven by instinct, curiosity, and the faint pull of a purpose that even he had yet to define. The tech priest recorded the scene, voice trembling in both awe and fear. If he is not a Primarch, then perhaps he is something older, a fragment of forgotten divinity, a shard of myth that existed before the Imperium itself. To encounter him is to witness inevitability incarnate. He is not merely a warrior, he is a constant, a force beyond classification, beyond understanding. And so, the Godslayer left the Forge World behind, the echoes of his violence lingering like a whisper of destiny. The demons of Khorne, humiliated and enraged, would regroup, yet they could not predict him. The Imperium would speculate, fear, and debate, yet they could not categorize him. The galaxy itself had been reminded that some forces existed outside expectation, outside control, outside war. Kratos moved on, calm, unbroken, purposeful. He did not seek allies. He did not seek war. He did not seek recognition. He walked forward, a solitary force of inevitability, leaving chaos in his wake and cosmic watchers unsettled. The battlefield, the demons, the Imperium all had glimpsed only a fraction of his power. What came next would not be measured by armies, by allegiance, or by prophecy, but by the singular force of a Godslayer who answered to no one. Kratos moved through the shattered spires of a forgotten shrine world, the air heavy with the scent of incense, oil, and decay. The atmosphere was thick with static energy, a lingering echo of psychic resonance that clung to the stones themselves. Here, the dead and the divine overlapped in subtle waves, the remnants of devotion, of power, and of unfulfilled purpose. Amid the ruins, a faint pulse drew him onward, subtle but insistent, like a heartbeat echoing through centuries. It was a voice, but not a voice as mortals understand it, a resonance. A shadow of thought and memory, embedded in the warp dot, the source revealed itself in the heart of the shrine, a chamber of obsidian and ceramite, etched with sigils that had long since faded to gray. A psychic light shimmered from a fractured reliquary, illuminating the room in spectral hues. It was here that the echo of the Emperor lingered, not fully alive, not wholly dead, a consciousness fractured across millennia, seeking to speak across the gulf of time and despair. The presence was immense, overwhelming, yet restrained, filtered through the shards of what had once been omnipotent will. Kratos approached, silent, each footfall measured, deliberate, unhurried. There was no awe in him, not the kind that bows, not the kind that begs, but there was attention, a recognition of magnitude. The psychic echo stirred, sensing the presence of one who had walked through death and divinity alike, a mortal who had slain gods and titans, a force shaped by loss, rage, and unyielding purpose. The Emperor's fractured consciousness pulsed in response, tentative, probing, as if testing the waters of a mind that had been forged in violence, yet tempered by experience. Fragments of vision unfolded before Kratos' eyes. He saw the Primarchs, scattered children of the Emperor, torn from one another by fate and ambition. He glimpsed the Horus heresy, the betrayal that sundered brotherhoods and shattered galaxies, armies clashing across worlds in a war that would never truly end. Entire star systems burned as brother fought brother, the universe drowning in an eternal tide of blood and grief. And through it all, he sensed the Emperor's hand, immense, calculating, flawed. A father attempting to hold a galaxy together with impossibly tight fingers. Failing even as he sought to protect it, the visions twisted and folded around him. Showing more than history, they revealed intention, regret, and the weight of millennia. The Emperor's mistakes were clear, exposed in psychic shards. The inability to foresee betrayal, the arrogance of placing sons above mortals, the stubborn insistence that he alone could guide humanity to salvation. And yet, within those same shards, there was something else: recognition, faint but undeniable. He understood Kratos' nature, a mortal who had killed gods, who had measured power, wrath, and consequence, and who bore the weight of his actions without delusion or excuse. You. The voice echoed, layered and fragmented, yet coherent enough to pierce the silence. You are. Like me, and yet unlike me. Mortal, divine by action, but human in essence. You carry the burden of those you have slain. You bear the weight of power without the crown of control. Kratos said nothing. His gaze remained steady, focused on the heart of the psychic light, his body unflinching even as the visions twisted and tried to intrude into his mind. He did not recoil. He did not argue. He did not speak. He merely listened, observing, taking measure of the echo before him. The Emperor continued, each word resonating like a shiver through the warp itself. The Primarchs. Scattered. Betrayal. Horus. War upon war upon war. The galaxy bleeds, and I failed where I should not have. Mortals, demigods, gods, all caught in the currents of inevitability. And you, Godslayer, you walk among them. Mortal yet unstoppable. Strong yet aware. Kratos did not reply. Words were not necessary. Not here. The Emperor, sensing his silence, allowed it to pass without pressure. The echo waiting, probing, watching. You have killed as I have, the Emperor said, the voice low, laden with centuries of regret. You have judged, struck, and moved through power that should have broken you. And yet, what will you do? Will you perpetuate this cycle of blood and vengeance? Or will you break it? The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, as if the chamber itself had frozen in anticipation. The words were not merely inquiry. They were challenge, warning, prophecy. Every fiber of the broken Emperor's consciousness reached out, searching for a spark of decision, a choice that could alter the pattern of countless wars yet to come. Kratos remained still. He did not answer. The silence was not defiance. It was absence of concern for expectation, a refusal to allow anyone, even a shattered god, to define the path he would follow. The echo of the Emperor pulsed faintly, as if aware that no words could fully capture the weight and inevitability of the Godslayer's will. Fragments of vision continued to twist around him. He glimpsed the galaxy not as it had been, but as it always seemed to be, a spiral of conflict, ambition, and suffering without end. Star systems burned, emperors died and rose again, demons multiplied, and mortals fought and died beneath the weight of forces beyond their understanding. The tapestry of war stretched across millennia, unbroken, unrelenting. And within that tapestry he moved, a single figure of clarity and consequence. Untouched by ideology, untouched by expectation, untouched by hope or despair, the Emperor's echo pulsed again, softer this time, almost intimate. You see what I could not prevent. You see what my children could not endure. You have killed gods, and yet the galaxy persists. You carry their weight. Do you understand it? Can you choose otherwise? Kratos' gaze drifted past the visions, past the echoes, past the psychic resonance that sought to impress, influence, or intimidate. He did not answer. The absence of reply was not disrespect nor submission. It was clarity, the refusal to bind his path to the expectations of others. No matter how divine, ancient, or shattered, the Emperor sensed this, and even in his broken state, a trace of understanding emerged. This being, mortal in essence, yet godlike in action, would not be swayed by prophecy, fear, or history. He would act according to his own purpose, not that of fathers, sons, gods, or emperors. And in that, there was both hope and dread. The galaxy had glimpsed a variable it could not contain. A force beyond cycles and prediction. Kratos stepped closer to the relic, the shards of psychic energy brushing against him without touching, whispering secrets of consequence and inevitability. He felt the weight of vision and history, of prophecy and regret, but did not bend to it. The echoes of the Emperor faded slightly, not in withdrawal, but in acknowledgement. A question had been asked, a challenge presented, a choice hinted at. And though no answer came, the weight of silence spoke volumes. In the hushed aftermath, the chamber seemed to breathe, the relic pulsing faintly, the visions dissolving into ambient resonance. Kratos turned, leaving the shrine behind, unhurried, unbroken, and undeterred. He carried no message, no judgment, no promise. He carried only himself, and the path that lay ahead, undefined, unbound, unstoppable. The Emperor's echo lingered, a soft vibration through the warp, whispering into the void. Will he break the cycle, or continue it? And the galaxy, vast and endless, waited, silent and patient, as the God-Slayer moved forward, a solitary force untouched by expectation, answering only to the inevitability of his own will. Across the galaxy, whispers traveled faster than any fleet. On hive worlds, canticles were murmured in soot-streaked corridors. In the endless corridors of space marine battle monasteries, rumors leapt from squad to squad, chapter to chapter. The God-Slayer had appeared, moved, and vanished again. No man had seen him long enough to define him, yet every report carried the unmistakable truth. He was unlike anything the Imperium had ever encountered. Lost Primarch? Perhaps. A shard of a forgotten pantheon? Possibly. But certainty was impossible, and in uncertainty, fear grew. Among the Adeptus Astartes, debates raged. Veteran sergeants, clad in armor worn smooth from centuries of battle, argued over the man's nature. He walks like a warrior of legend, one said, voice low and tense, but his power, it surpasses even the tales of our progenitor Primarchs. None of us can match him. Another shook his head, bolter resting against his chest plate. He answers to no one. He kills with precision, with calm. He is not a tool, not a champion, not a weapon. He is inevitable. Across chapters, the speculation became legend in real time. A name spoken in awe and caution. Kratos, the Mechanicus, ever drawn to the intersection of divinity and technology, felt both a reverent curiosity and a lust for acquisition. Minds wired to see the universe as patterns and equations debated fervently whether he should be dissected to reveal hidden laws of physiology, or venerated as a living artifact of divine engineering. Some whispered that he might be a prototype, a biological framework perfected by unknown powers. Others insisted that he was a relic of the old pantheons, wandering still among mortal realms. In Forge World laboratories, red-robed tech priests activated psychometers, augurs, and data tethers. Yet every attempt to classify him returned anomalies, contradictions, errors-proof that the galaxy's greatest minds could not bind him to certainty. Chaos, too, took note. Khorne's demons fumed, still smarting from their defeats, impatient for the opportunity to claim him as a champion. Tzeentch's tendrils of possibility coiled around his presence, plotting contingencies across impossible timelines, each branch of reality more complex than the last. Slaanesh whispered from the void, curious, hungry for the perfection of control and sensation that Kratos denied. Nurgle sighed in slow, inevitable resignation, recognizing a soul resilient yet wounded, perfect in its resistance. The Chaos Gods debated strategies, summoning agents, and yet each effort faltered because he did not respond. The galaxy's oldest and most terrible powers could not predict him. Even the Eldar, those fragile seers who wove probability and foresight like threads of silk, felt tremors in their craft. Farseers saw impossibilities unfold, glimpses of timelines where a single mortal shaped the fate of worlds, disrupted destinies, and defied the currents of inevitability. Ghost Home visions wavered, shrines of foresight flickered, and panicked inquiries were whispered in the wind. "A force beyond the weave," murmured one. "He defies probability. He is uncontained." The Eldar, who calculated futures to the smallest fraction of probability, felt the first true unease of cosmic proportions. Rogue traders and independent warlords sent emissaries, hoping to sway or recruit him, offering ships, wealth, secrets, and alliances. None found purchase. He neither consented nor rejected outright. He simply moved, stepping through worlds and battlefields with his own purpose. Civilians saw him and remembered him as a savior. In settlements ravaged by demons, he arrived like a force of inevitability. His presence alone scattered attackers. With precise, unhurried movements, he dismantled demonic hordes that threatened helpless populations. No pyrotechnics, no reveling in death, only the quiet, methodical removal of threats. Survivors spoke of him in hushed, awed tones, describing him as both terrifying and protective, impossible to reconcile. On battlefields, Kratos' neutrality became a force in itself. He did not rally armies, nor did he seek followers. When the Imperium called, he did not answer. When chaos extended its influence, he did not submit. When worlds burned, he intervened, not for allegiance, not for glory, but because a thread of purpose tugged him in that direction. The galaxy observed a truth it had never encountered: violence without ideology, power without ambition, war without loyalty. The effect was disorienting. Commanders, captains, and even the most seasoned psychers felt the weight of his actions ripple through strategy. Prophecy and faith alike, he passed silently through the carnage of skirmishes, leaving whispers behind him, resonating like the echo of an earthquake. In the shadow of his passage, demons fell, armies hesitated, and rulers questioned assumptions that had governed their lifetimes. In every encounter, Kratos demonstrated a philosophy both simple and impossible. He kills only when necessary, protects only when he must, and chooses only what aligns with his own measure of inevitability. To those who observed, it was terrifying, a constant reminder that some forces could not be controlled, worshipped, or coerced. Rumors began to coalesce into legend, forming a mythos that transcended borders. Imperial governors whispered of a warrior who was both protector and destructor, a being beyond chapter or regiment, beyond fleet or fortress. Chaos cultists debated which god would claim him, each uncertain, whether he could be swayed, whether he could be corrupted, or whether he would simply walk past all their designs. Eldar warlocks trembled as probabilities collapsed beneath his steps. Rogue traders speculated endlessly on his origin, seeking patterns where none existed, hoping to predict a future that refused to form. Kratos did not linger for any of it. He walked through the galaxy with deliberate certainty, moving past ruined cities, scorched battlefields, and psychic disturbances that would have fractured lesser minds. He neither celebrated nor lamented the effect of his presence. He did not correct misperceptions, nor did he encourage them. He existed, and in existing, he became a mirror to the galaxy, a reminder that power without motive, strength without ideology, And judgment without allegiance could not be contained. Civilians who glimpsed him remembered only the precision of his acts, the calm inevitability of his movements, and the way the impossible seemed natural in his presence. The whispers that followed him were not prayers nor curses, but awe at a being who enacted violence with purpose, yet did not dwell in triumph, who shaped outcomes without seeking dominion, and who refused the comforts of loyalty, devotion, or fear. His neutrality became its own force, a mirror of the galaxy's infinite conflicts, reflecting them back without distortion, without bias, and without expectation. Everywhere he went, the tension mounted. Space Marines recalculated potential strategies. Mechanicus augurs flagged anomalies beyond comprehension. Chaos powers debated their claims. Eldar foresaw impossible futures. And rogue traders plotted contingencies that never aligned. None of them could predict him. None of them could control him. None of them could define him. And in that impossibility, the galaxy found both fascination and terror. Kratos continued forward, step by step, world by world, presence by presence. Violence, protection, inevitability, these were his constants. Allegiance, ambition, loyalty, these were his absences. And through the corridors of whispered rumor, through the scattered archives of observation and prophecy, through the shivering currents of the warp itself, a single truth emerged. Kratos was no one's champion, no god's pawn, no empire's weapon. He was a variable that the universe itself could not contain. And in that awareness lay the tension, the awe, the quiet anticipation threaded across stars and centuries. For every observer, mortal or divine, loyalist or heretic, the question remained. If he did not choose a side, if he refused to be bound, if he moved according to his own measure of purpose, what would come next? And more terrifying still, who would follow or who could oppose the path of a god-slayer unbound by expectation, unclaimed by ideology, and untouched by fear? The galaxy waited. In hushed whispers, in psychic tremors, in shattered observatories and dying shrines, it waited. And Kratos walked on, calm, unbroken, purposeful, leaving only inevitability in his wake. The skies of the demon world churned like blood in a cauldron, clouds dark and boiling, streaked with crimson lightning. Mountains of jagged obsidian rose from the blackened soil, and rivers ran with molten metal and ichor. The air itself shimmered with the aura of war, thick with the scent of smoke, iron, and decay. Here, in this realm twisted by the will of Khorne, the blood god chose to manifest his fury, and the warp itself quaked in anticipation. Kratos arrived as the ground trembled beneath him, footsteps echoing like the drumbeats of inevitability. He had faced armies, titans, and gods, yet the atmosphere here carried a weight unlike any battlefield he had known. The sky split as Khorne's avatar descended, a towering colossus of muscle, horn and blood-red armor, wielding an axe that burned with the fury of countless slain souls. Its eyes glowed like twin suns, and its laughter rolled across the mountains like thunder, shaking reality itself. This was no ordinary duel. The first clash of weapons carried the weight of ideologies. Khorne embodied endless slaughter, rage without purpose, bloodshed for the sake of hunger. He existed to consume, to dominate, to revel in the infinite carnage of war. Kratos, in contrast, represented violence with intention calculated, measured, wielded as a tool, never for indulgence, never for worship, never for submission. In that ideological mirror, every strike, every parry, every movement became a declaration. The avatar lunged, axe swinging in a wide arc, designed to obliterate mountains and tear the land asunder. Kratos met it with patience, sidestepping the strike with the deliberate grace of a predator. His own axe rose, not in rage, but in inevitability. When it met Khorne's, the impact resonated like the roar of a collapsing world. Sparks of warp energy and shards of the ground itself erupted from the collision. Time seemed to dilate as the battle began a symphony of destruction, measured, brutal, and absolute. Each strike was both attack and statement. Kratos moved with purpose, avoiding reckless fury, dismantling the avatar piece by piece. Limbs struck with precision, armor shattered, and the ground beneath their feet cracked under the pressure of divine power. Khorne's avatar roared, fury uncontained, yet every moment of anger only revealed the contrast between them. Where Khorne sought chaos and domination, Kratos sought clarity and meaning. The blood god could not understand calm in the face of carnage. It was alien, unsettling, and most importantly, unassailable. The battle unfolded like a dark dance. Kratos sidestepped a crushing blow, swung his axe in a wide, deliberate arc, and struck the massive weapon of Khorne itself. With a sound like a cracking planet, the axe splintered, shards of enchanted metal spraying outward. The avatar staggered, the roar of laughter twisting into a growl of rage. Kratos advanced, unhurried, lifting the axe he still carried as if it were a natural extension of himself. One measured strike, aimed at the spine, and the avatar's back broke with a sickening crack, bending the titan over like a tree in a storm. Khorne's laughter did not falter. It filled the skies, reverberated through the ground, and pulsed through the very fabric of the warp. Yet the Godslayer did not flinch. The avatar collapsed, yet even in destruction, the blood god's voice carried across the battlefield. "You resist me," it thundered. "You defy the purpose of all strength, all fury, all blood. Join me, Godslayer. Ascend. Serve. Become my champion, and the galaxy will tremble beneath your wrath." Kratos regarded the shattered form, calm, unbroken, eyes distant but unyielding. There was no answer, no hesitation, no awe. The offer itself, an attempt to co-opt, to bend, to dominate, failed before it was spoken. Kratos understood the nature of Khorne, and he understood himself. Violence was a tool, not a devotion. Power was measured, not worshipped. Strength existed to protect, to survive, to impose purpose, not to fuel endless hunger for slaughter. The avatar rose again, blood-red armor cracking and glowing with the fevered energy of the warp, but Kratos did not move quickly. He advanced deliberately, each step measured, each strike a reaffirmation of intent. The battle continued, cinematic and brutal, yet imbued with a rhythm unlike any war the galaxy had known. Every swing of his axe was precise, every dodge deliberate. Time stretched around them. The world seemed to hold its breath. Mortals and demons alike could only watch. Horrified and mesmerized, Khorne's avatar lashed out in desperation, seeking to overwhelm with sheer fury, but each attack met the calm inevitability of Kratos' response. A stomp shattered the ground beneath, sending shockwaves that flattened jagged rock and disintegrated lesser demons. Kratos' movements, though violent, were purposeful, surgical. The chaos that was Khorne's avatar could not sway him. It could not bend him, could not intimidate him, could not claim him. Every blow, every parry, every strike reaffirmed the truth. He was not a servant of gods. He was a variable beyond control. As the battle reached its zenith, the avatar faltered under the weight of inevitability. Kratos tore it apart, limb by limb, until the form that had seemed indestructible lay broken. Yet Khorne's laughter did not cease. It rolled across mountains and valleys, echoing in the minds of all who could hear, a reminder that gods do not die easily, that power is not surrendered lightly. And yet Kratos did not bow, did not tremble, did not hesitate. The blood god had been defeated here, but Kratos did not claim victory. He had no need to. He had proven a point that words or worship could not convey. He would not serve. Khorne's voice persisted, whispering through the shards of the broken avatar, a temptation and a threat intertwined. Power, devotion, blood, serve and be eternal. Kratos walked past the wreckage, axe resting lightly in his hand, boots leaving prints in scorched soil. His gaze was distant, focused on something beyond the immediate, something that even Khorne could not perceive. He gave no answer. He offered no acknowledgement. The offer of ascension, of worship, of dominion, was nothing to him. Strength without purpose, power without meaning, these were chains he refused to wear. He moved onward, leaving the avatar shattered, leaving the mountain of corpses, leaving Khorne's laughter to echo unanswered across the desolate world. From afar, the galaxy's watchers trembled. Imperium commanders recalculated entire campaigns. Space Marines whispered theories of a new Primarch, a god incarnate beyond their comprehension. Chaos priests debated their claims. Psychers shivered as they felt the psychic tremor of the encounter. Even the warp itself seemed unsettled, Aware that its currents had been challenged and redirected by a single mortal's will, Kratos' calm, deliberate departure left a residue of fear and awe in the minds of all observers. He had enacted violence at a scale beyond imagination, yet he had done so without desire for glory, without rage, without submission to any ideology or god. His neutrality, his indifference to allegiance, had become a force in itself, one the galaxy had no capacity to predict, to control, or to contain that, and in the aftermath. A quiet truth settled like dust over the shattered landscape. Khorne's avatar had been defeated, yet the blood god still existed. Kratos had resisted temptation, rejected ascension, denied worship, and walked away. The choice was his alone, made not from fear, nor from desire, nor from obedience, but from the clarity of purpose forged through centuries of battle, grief, and reckoning. The world remained scorched, the mountains jagged, the rivers of molten metal flowing. Yet Kratos moved beyond it all. The echo of the battle lingered like a distant memory in the minds of those who had witnessed it, both mortal and divine. A single figure, calm and unstoppable, had faced a god of endless slaughter and emerged unchanged, unclaimed, unbroken. The galaxy would remember this day not for the death of an avatar, but for the revelation that one being mortal, God-slayer, wanderer, answered to no one. The blood god's laughter faded with distance, but the weight of the encounter lingered. Kratos walked onward, leaving behind the wreckage, leaving behind the chaos, leaving behind the expectation that violence demanded worship. He carried only his own will, his own purpose, and the quiet certainty that he would never bow to another god. The stars were cold, distant, and indifferent, yet Kratos walked among them, as if their light carried meaning only he could discern. The galaxy stretched vast and endless, a tapestry of fire, shadow, and silence. Entire systems had been consumed by war, yet he moved through the ruins as one moves through a dream, deliberate, calm, inevitable. His presence left traces, subtle yet undeniable, stories whispered among survivors, legends forming where the galaxy had almost forgotten hope. He wandered not as a conqueror, not as a champion, not as a servant of any god or empire. He wandered as a force of consequence. Where refugees cowered in the shadow of tyrants or demonic incursion, he appeared. Cities freed from oppression remembered only the quiet precision of his interventions. He did not linger for applause. He did not wait for recognition. He left behind no banners, no claims, no allegiance, only the aftermath of inevitability. The proof that someone had chosen to act where others could not. Demons still rose from the warp to challenge him. Yet each confrontation was brief and unremarkable. He did not seek slaughter, but when confronted with raw destruction, he moved with measured precision, dismantling horrors the Imperium had feared even to name. Bloodletters fell, greater demons crumbled, and the echoes of the warp's hunger followed him across systems, always reaching, always probing, but never claiming. It was a hunt without prey. He was the predator, yet he did not hunt for glory. The Imperium still whispered his name with reverence, fear, and obsessive curiosity. In the corridors of Gothic spires and the depths of fortress monasteries, tech priests recalculated what little data they had. Rogue traders plotted their paths to intercept him, hoping to understand, to recruit, to exploit. Space Marines debated strategies and probabilities, yet even their most advanced calculations faltered before the variable that was Kratos. To them, he had become legend in real time. A god-slayer, a wanderer, a force outside expectation. Chaos, too, seethed. Khorne fumed, Tzeentch plotted, Slaanesh whispered in frustration, and Nurgle waited patiently for a weakness that would never appear. He was not theirs. He could not be owned, corrupted, or claimed. Each god of the warp, no matter how ancient or cunning, understood this at a fundamental level. He was a constant outside their manipulation, a blade of inevitability slicing through prophecy and desire alike. Even Xeno species whispered of him. Eldar seers caught glimpses of improbable futures in their visions, futures where a mortal walked among gods and titans alike, changing outcomes simply by existing. Craftworlds recalibrated their movements, wary of a force that defied allegiance and prediction. In the uncharted void, whispers spread among scattered colonies of alien species. A pale giant, Relentless, unstoppable, neither friend nor enemy, yet capable of both protection and destruction. Kratos' myth was not confined to the Imperium or the Warp. It rippled across all life that observed, survived, or remembered. And yet, for all the stories, all the awe, all the terror, Kratos did not pause. He carried forward, step by deliberate step, his expression calm, his mind focused. Behind the certainty of motion lay his burden, the memory of gods he had slain, the consequences of rage, the weight of mistakes that no mortal could undo. He did not deny regret. He bore it like armor, heavy yet tempered, shaping him without imprisoning him. The galaxy saw only the myth, but he carried the human truth, the choice to continue, to act, to decide. In quiet moments between battles, when the stars stretched infinite and silent before him, he paused. He stared into the void, listening to the faint hum of the warp, feeling the subtle tremors of the Imperium sphere, sensing the distant pulse of gods who wished to claim him. The universe was alive with expectation, and yet he alone remained unchanged. He understood the cycle that bound mortals, emperors, gods, and armies, alike a cycle of violence, retribution, and endless war. And he understood, with quiet clarity, that it could end. He whispered to the darkness, voice low and deliberate, carrying across void and memory alike. The cycle ends. If I choose it to. The words were not a declaration to the universe, nor to gods or men. They were a meditation, a truth spoken into the vast silence that had always been his companion. In that moment, the galaxy itself seemed to pause. As if listening, as if waiting for him to act or not, the myth was born not from conquest, not from allegiance, and not from fear, but from the simple fact of his existence. He became the protector of the defenseless, the breaker of tyrants, the ghost story whispered by humans and Xenos alike. Across ruined worlds and burning systems, across warp-tainted planets and forgotten starports, the name Kratos became a symbol of both dread and hope. Mortals and immortals alike measured the universe against him. Yet none could contain him, none could predict him, none could claim him. And so he continued, quietly, calmly, purposefully. He moved through the galaxy, as he always had, unclaimed by gods, unbound by empires, unshaken by prophecy, yet profoundly aware of the weight of his choices. The legends and whispers, the awe and terror, the prayers and curses, all followed him like shadows. But he carried only himself, the regret of what he had done, the clarity of who he was, and the intention to choose his path, not because the universe demanded it, but because he would. The stars stretched on, indifferent, and the void waited patiently. Somewhere, the Imperium shivered at the thought of him. Somewhere, the Chaos gods fumed at his refusal to serve. Somewhere, stories began and died, whispered by the living, carried by the dead. And Kratos walked on, a solitary figure, the embodiment of inevitability, the myth of a godslayer who had refused allegiance and found purpose in the act of choosing itself. The cycle remained unbroken, but it was no longer unquestioned. Somewhere in the infinite darkness, amidst whispers and shadows, Kratos' voice lingered, calm, human, yet unyielding. The cycle ends, if I choose it to. And for now, that was enough. Asterisk,